Most people think if someone in their family were hurt or killed in a terrorist attack, there's nothing they could do about it. Well, there's a man in New Jersey, Stephen Flato, who said, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to make someone pay for the death of my daughter. In April 1995, a suicide bomber rammed a van packed with explosives into this bus as it headed for a beach resort in Israel's Gaza Strip. One of the passengers was Stephen Flato's daughter, Alisa. She was a 20-year-old honors student spending the semester in Israel.
I heard on the radio there had been a terror attack in Gaza, and I knew at that split second that Alisa was involved.
Stephen Flato caught the next plane to Israel, and within a matter of hours was standing at her bedside.
The doctors took me into a side room. They explained that she'd been hit in the head by a piece of shrapnel. There wasn't a mark on it, but for a bandage back here. But the shrapnel had lacerated her brain, and that there was no hope. She was brain dead.
So many people were outraged by the death of this American girl by a terrorist bomb that 2,000 people, many of them strangers, attended her funeral in New Jersey. And President Clinton called the family.
He started out by telling me that he and Hillary had been talking at breakfast that morning. How would they react if something happened to their daughter?
Chelsea.
Yes, Chelsea.
So he's calling you.
Not as the President of the United States, but as a father.
3 years later, Flato's wife and their 4 other children still have trouble talking about Elisa's death. But it's something he's never stopped talking about. He had a second conversation with President Clinton.
I told him what kind of curse terrorism is, and that it must be rooted out at all levels, even if it requires people making decisions that may make them look unpopular or uncomfortable. He agreed with me, I thought.
He delivered the same message to the Congress, which in 1996 passed anti-terrorism legislation, including the Flato Amendment, which allow victims' families to sue foreign countries that sponsor terrorists. So in other words, the law
gave me a weapon. In other words, a sovereign country has the right to launch Tomahawk missiles at another country to protect its rights, as we just did a few weeks ago. I don't have that kind of power. I don't have $60 million to launch those kinds of missiles. But now I have something that's purely American. I have American jurisdiction over the people who sponsored the terrorist attack which killed Alisa.
And you're a lawyer.
Yes. And
you said, I'm going to use that weapon.
Absolutely.
How did you know who to sue? You know, you can't sue a terrorist cell.
Correct. We were very fortunate. I had the opportunity to meet with President Clinton again. And I told him I was about ready to bring a lawsuit, and I handed him a letter telling we needed the active assistance and cooperation of the State Department to help us.
And what did he say?
He said, I know what you're doing, and you're brave and you're courageous once again. And that was it for that couple of minutes.
But that's all it took. Soon thereafter, Flato and his attorneys were meeting with the State Department's top counterterrorism officials. They shared classified information with him, including the name of the terrorist group that killed Alisa.
It's called the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Shikaki faction.
You actually had a name like that.
Absolutely. The American government knows who they are.
And the U.S. government knows who sponsors them.
They get their money from the Islamic Republic of Iran.
The State Department officially told you that.
Once they told me that it was a government that killed my daughter, I said, I'm not letting him off the hook that easily.
There's no question in your mind that when the State Department gave you the information about Iran, that you were going to make it public and that you were going to use it in court.
Yes.
And he did. Armed with the Flato Amendment, he sued Iran, a country the U.S. broke relations with nearly 20 years ago. Flato's lawyer, Stephen Perlis, sent a summons to Tehran, which dismissively returned the papers with the message, "Do not USA," written on the envelope.
I sent the envelope out to be opened by people who are adept at opening things that might go boom.
There was no boom, but there was also no response to the summons. Flato still had to build a case against Iran to present in court, so he turned to several experts, including Patrick Clausen, a former consultant to the CIA. Clausen dug up the smoking gun that linked Tehran to Alisa's killers. As he told us, it was under everyone's nose all along.
The Iranians publish their budget each year. Surprise.
An English translation of the budget shows that in 1992, Iran spent $800 million on roads, $100 million on cement, $500,000 on promoting tourism.
And then the last item in this $19 billion expenditure, there's the support of Palestine Islamic Revolution, $20 million.
Just sitting there in the printed...
Well, they're pretty proud of the fact that they support these Palestinian terrorist groups. They don't usually reveal exactly how much they support them. And in fact, I think that's an underestimate. I think that's only part of what they were spending that year.
This is in dollars.
Yeah, $20 million.
$20 million for 1 year.
And that's right.
We traced funds from Iran, bank by bank, account number by account number, to the terrorist organization, and then we proved that the terrorist organization that took receipt of the funds detonated the bomb that killed Alisa Flato.
Can you tell us where the banks were?
I can only tell you that in this long series of transfers, 2 of those banks were in the United States.
The group gets a lot more than just money from Iran.
The Iranians provide them with training and material support. And leaders of that organization have frequently visited Iran and been met by the top leadership in Iran. It tells them how much they support them and how proud they are at the support they provide.
In March, the Flatos presented their case here at the U.S. courthouse in Washington. After just 2 days of testimony, the judge found Iran liable for the death of Alisa Flato, and under the terms of the new Flato Amendment, ordered Iran to pay the family $247 million, $100 million more than the Flatos had asked for. In an angrily worded statement, the judge said he wanted to send a message to governments that sponsor terrorism.
He read his decision right over the bench.
And you're sitting there.
Yes.
And tell us.
Well, when it was over, I slammed the table. I looked up at the sky as if Alisa was there. And I said, yes, Alisa.
How conceivably can you collect from the country of Iran? We don't even have diplomatic relations with
Right. Well, the first thing we have to remember, there are still Iranian assets in this country. Our assets that were seized in 1979 by the American government in retaliation for the seizure of the embassy in Tehran.
Assets like Iran's old embassy and ambassador's residence in Washington, as well as this building once used by Iranian diplomats. But when Flato's lawyer tried to seize them, he ran into an unexpected foe.
Lo and behold, 15 lawyers from the federal government show up in the courthouse objecting to our attachment of Iranian assets here.
The same government that encouraged the suit is now in court against you.
Yes, and of course, you know, the judge says, well, whose side are you here on? And they're very quick to point out, Your Honor, we're not representing the Iranians. Well, as my attorney said at that point in time, there's only 2 parties to this lawsuit. And they're representing, you know, my attorneys are there representing the Flato family. So therefore, you've got to be representing the other guys. That makes the government very uncomfortable when we take that position.
But is that your position? Are
Absolutely.
you saying?
Absolutely, it's our position, because
Your position that the American government is now
representing the Iranians, yes.
James Rubin, the State Department spokesman, says the U.S. is not representing Iran, but defending an age-old principle.
When diplomats or envoys from countries go to another country, their property is sacrosanct.
Congress passed a law, said in the case of states like Iran, terrorist states, declared by the State Department on the terrorism list, and Iran is #1, that they don't get the same courtesies as all the other law-abiding states. They made an exception in the case of Iran.
I'm not a lawyer, Leslie, but this is very simple. Diplomatic property must remain sacrosanct, or our embassies and our people overseas will be subject to legal challenge and their property could be confiscated.
First of all, we have no diplomats in Iran. Secondly, our embassy in Iran. How did they treat our embassy in Iran?
Exactly the point. And we condemned Iran from one end of the planet to the other for taking American hostages in our embassy. For us to do the same behavior, that would be unthinkable. We're a nation of laws. The Iranian government in 1979 allowed the students to take over our embassy, and the whole world condemned it. We are not going to take action that the whole world is going to condemn.
Now the Clinton administration, once so helpful, is even refusing to tell the Flatos how to locate Iran's non-diplomatic properties. But Perlis has been able to identify a few on his own, but only a few.
We've found a couple of banks that Iran owns in the United States. I think we found some skyscrapers that Iran owns in the United States. They own a lot of assets here.
But the government lawyers told him he can't have them either, or the $5.5 million the U.S. has collected from renting out Iran's old embassy and other diplomatic property. The reason? All those assets were frozen in 1981 to be used as bargaining chips with Iran in any future dispute.
I don't know how you bargain with terrorists. I mean, the President and Secretary of State Albright have been very clear that we're going to track these people down and we're going to bomb mud huts into oblivion. But the Iranian embassy, for some reason, is sacrosanct. In other words, are there two levels that we go after certain people that we don't need, such as the people who live in Afghanistan or the Sudan, but when it comes to the Iranians, we've got to be very tiptoey? I don't buy that. We're going to have one policy for the country. We're not going to have any policy at all. Maybe American policy is a joke. I hope not.
Stephen Flato and his lawyers believe that the real reason the State Department is not, in their words, abiding by this law is because you want to have a thaw in relations with Iran.
Nothing could be further from the truth. This is a legal case. This has nothing to do with any desire on anybody's part to have an evolution in U.S.-Iranian relations. Let's remember, Iran is under the stiffest possible sanctions precisely because of its support for terrorism. This has nothing to do with our Iran policy and everything to do with the fact that diplomatic property must remain sacrosanct.
But at the United Nations just last week, Iranian President Mohammad Khatami said that one condition for improving U.S.-Iranian relations was the United States returning to Iran the very assets the Flatos are trying to seize.
I would go to the Iranians, if I were the State Department, and say, oh, well, we're sorry this happened, but that's the price you got to pay when you engage in terrorism. Now let's work out some kind of a deal here where you stop terrorism, and in return, you won't have to face these kind of suits in the future.
What do you say to those people who believe that U.S. foreign policy ought to be able to trump, override one individual who brings a suit like this?
It's not just one individual. It's families here in America. It's families around the world who've been the victims of state sponsors of terrorism.
And you see absolutely no value in improving relations with the country of Iran?
Not unless they deal with us, no.
Not, what do you mean? Not.
They have to address what they did to Alisa. They have to pay the judgment. They have to give up their budgeted monies for terrorism. They have to renounce what they've done previously.
Now, you've had 3 conversations with President Clinton.
Yes.
If you could get a 4th today, what would you say?
What are you doing to me? What are you doing to the other parents? By blocking us, you're hurting us.
Using the Flato Amendment, 3 former hostages who were held in Lebanon by Iranian-backed extremists won a $65 million court judgment against Iran last month. One of their options is to try to seize an Iranian jumbo jet.